In northern Burkina Faso, terrorists had captured yet another village. The local population waited hopefully for military assistance. When armored vehicles entered the villagers were stunned. By the soldiers who emerged before them stood a unit of fully equipped and extremely professional female soldiers. The Lionesses of the Sahel, Africa's first all-women special forces unit, had arrived on the field. The village of Cumbri had been under terrorist control for 3 weeks, located in Burkina Faso's northern province. It was one of dozens of communities that had fallen to insurgent groups. In the past 5 years, the pattern was always the same. Armed men would arrive at dawn, execute local leaders who resisted established harsh control, and use the village as a base for further operations. When the first armored personnel carriers appeared on the horizon, the villagers assumed it was another military patrol that would briefly stop, perhaps exchange fire with hidden insurgents, and then retreat to their base, leaving the civilians to face brutal retaliation afterward. This had been a cycle for years, but something was different this time. The vehicles moved with deliberate precision, establishing a secure perimeter around the village with practiced efficiency. And when the rear hatches opened, the villagers stared in disbelief. These soldiers who emerged were women, not support staff or medical personnel, but full combat operators in desert camouflage, carrying advanced weapons, moving with the disciplined confidence of elite fighters. Each wore the insignia of the newly formed unit. That few outside military circles had heard of the Lionesses of the Sahel. Their commander, Captain Aisha Ouedraogo, stood 5'6" with her boots on, but carried herself with an authority that made her seem much taller at 30, till she had already served 10 years in Burkina Faso's regular army. Before being selected to lead this experimental unit, she surveyed the village with experienced eyes, noting the signs of insurgent occupation, propaganda, graffiti on walls, evidence of makeshift command posts, and the fearful, uncertain faces of villagers secure the perimeter. She ordered calmly, "Bravo team, conduct house to house. Charlie team, establish the medical station. Remember, we're not just here to clear, we're here to hold." Women move with practiced coordination, each knowing her role precisely. Unlike previous military operations in the region that focused on brief engagements before withdrawal, this unit had a different mission: establish a permanent presence, build trust with the local population, and create conditions for stability. The concept behind the Lionesses had emerged 6 months earlier in a tense meeting at Burkina Faso's presidential palace. President Ibrahim Traore had summoned his military leadership. After yet another failed operation against insurgent groups left a dozen soldiers dead and a village still under enemy control. "Our current approach isn't working," Traore had said, studying the grim reports before him. "We clear an area, leave, and the Traore threatened the next day. The villagers don't trust us because we don't stay. We need a new strategy." General Traore, the aging head of the armed forces, had responded with the traditional solution: "We need more equipment, more air support." The French have offered additional advisory teams. No, Traore interrupted firmly, "More foreign advisors aren't the answer. We've had French, American, and European training missions for years, and the situation has only worsened. We need Burkinabe solutions for Burkina problems." The room had fallen silent, the tension palpable. Since taking power, Traore had consistently pushed against dependency on Western military support, again that it often came with hidden agendas and failed to address local realities. It was Colonel Mayim Sankarani of the few women in the high command who broke the silence with an unexpected proposal. "Mr. President, I've been reviewing our intelligence on insurgent tactics. They've adapted specifically to our male-dominated force structure. They know our patterns, our limitations." She paused, gathering courage for her next words. "But they have a vulnerability we haven't exploited. Their religious extremist makes them deeply uncomfortable engaging with women in combat. They believe being killed by a woman prevents their path to paradise." The room filled with dismissive murmurs, but Traore leaned forward, intrigued. "Continue, Colonel. I propose we create a specialized, all-female unit trained specifically for the unique challenges of our northern regions. Women who understand the language, the culture, who can gather intelligence no male soldier could access, who can establish relationships with female villagers, who have been systematically intimidated in the silence." General Traore scoffed with respect. "Colonel, this isn't some gender equality experiment. We're fighting a war against hardened extremists." "Exactly," Sankara countered, undeterred, "and we're fighting it exactly as they expect us to. What if we did something they cowed? Never anticipate something their ideology hasn't prepared them for." Traore studied the maps on the wall. Considering the proposal, it was radical, unconventional, and precisely the kind of innovative thinking he had been demanding from his military leadership. "How would this unit operate differently from our current forces?" he asked Colonel Sankara. was prepared for this question. They would be trained not just in combat operations, but in community stabilization. They would deploy to Avalanche and stay establishing security, while simultaneously building relationships, particularly with women and children, who see everything but are never consulted by male soldiers. They would serve as both warriors and bridges between the military and civilian populations. The debate had continued for hours, with traditional military leaders raising objections about women's physical capabilities, cultural sensitivities, and logistical challenge. But Traore had made his decision by the meetings, and "We will establish this unit," he announced. Colonel Sankara, "You will oversee its formation, select 50 women from our existing forces, plus another 50 civilian recruits with relevant skills, languages, medical training, community development. You have 3 months to create an operational unitas." The meeting adjourned. General Kabor approached Traore privately. "Mr. President, with respect, the Western advisors will strongly oppose this. They have established protocols, doctrine, that we won't inform them until the unit is operational." Traore replied simply, "This is a sovereign Burkina initiative. We will seek forgiveness rather than permission." The selection process began immediately and proved more challenging than anticipated, not for lack of candidates, but because of an overwhelming response. When the call went out for women to join this specialist unit, over 2,000 applied within the first week. They came from every region of Burkina Faso. Existing military personnel seeking new challenges, police officers, nurses, teachers, and many who had personally suffered from extremist violence. The training compound outside Ouedraogo became a laboratory for innovation. Traditional special force training was adapted to emphasize the unit's unique mission. Beyond combat skills, the women studied local dialects, cultural sensitivities, basic medical care, and community development strategies. They trained extensively in specific urban and rural environments. They would operate in using mock villages to practice clearing operations that minimized civilian casualties. Captain Aisha Ouedraogo emerged as the natural choice to lead the unit's first operational company, raised in a border village that had later fallen to extremists. She spoke 4 local languages and had served with distinction in the regular army. More importantly, she grasped the dual nature of their mission. They needed to be both fearsome fighters and community builders. Her male counterparts focused on the enemy. She told her troops during training, "We must focus equally on the civilians. Victory isn't just removing insurgents from a village for a day, it's making that village resistant to their return." 3 months into training, word of the experimental unit reached Western military advisors in the capital. Their action was predictably negative. A French colonel assigned to the EU training mission demanded a meeting with Traore president. "This initiative undermines years of established doctrine. These women cannot possibly be ready for combat operations against hardened insurgents." With only 6 months off training, Traore had listened politely before responding. "Colonel, your country has been providing military assistance in the Sahel for over a decade. In that time, the insurgency has grown stronger, not weaker. Perhaps it's time to try approaches your doctrine hasn't considered." Despite foreign skepticism, training continued. With the women developed innovative tactics that played to their strengths rather than trying to mirror male units. They emphasized intelligence gathering, precision operations, and community engagement. They trained extensively in pairs and small teams, developing an almost intuitive coordination. 6 months after that initial meeting, the unit was deemed combat ready. Their first deployment would be to the Somme province, one of the most contested regions in the country. The mission: reclaim and hold the village of Cumbri, establishing a model for a new approach to counterinsurgency. As Captain Ouedraogo led her troops through the village, they faced their first real test. The insurgents had fled before. Their arrival and intelligence leak had unfortunately warned them of the operation. But the challenge of securing the village remained. Sergeant Fatima Dio, leading Bravo team through house-to-house searches, encountered the first major challenge in a small compound at the village edge. The women were barred from entering by an elderly man. "No women with weapons will enter my home," he declared firmly. "It is against our traditions." Rather than force entry as male soldiers might have done, Sergeant Dio approached firmly. Respect by Lionesses companies had remained secure, with insurgent activity dramatically reduced. More significantly, these communities had begun to revival as economic activity resumed. Displaced residents returned and local governance structures re-established themselves. The approach wasn't without challenges. The units faced logistical difficulties, occasional resistance from traditional leaders, and the constant threat of adaptations by insurgent forces. Several Lionesses had been killed in combat operations, their sacrifices marked by national mourning and strength and drizzle among their comrades. Yet the strategic impact extended beyond military metrics in villages across northern Burkina Faso. Young women began to see new possibilities for their roles in society. Applications to join Lionesses far exceeded available positions. Community women's groups formed to support the units, creating civilian networks that further isolated insurgents from potential safe havens. Perhaps most telling was the response from neighboring countries facing similar insurgencies: Mali, Niger, and Chad sent military observers to study the Burkina model. Within a year, all three had begun establishing their own versions of female security units adapted to their specific contexts, but inspired by the Lionesses' success. Their French military establishment, initially dismissive, grudgingly acknowledged the program's effectiveness. A confidential instance that leaked to African media concluded that all-female units have demonstrated unexpected tactical advantage in the specific cultural context of the Sahel conflict. Their integrated security stabilization effect warrants further study. For President Traore, the Lionesses represented something beyond military innovation. They embodied his core philosophy that African nations needed to develop solutions based on their own realities, rather than imported models. In a region where women had long been marginalized from security discussions, despite bearing the brunt of conflicts impact, their emergence as security leaders represented a profound social transformation. 2 years after their formation, the Lionesses of the Sahel had expanded to over 1,000 members operating across Burkina Faso's northern regions. Their distinctive approach had become a cornerstone of the counter-national security strategy, complementing rather than replacing conventional forces. Captain Aisha, now promoted to Major, reflected on their journey during a training session for new recruits. When we began, people asked if women could really fight. That was never the right question. The question was whether we could secure our communities in ways traditional forces had failed to. The answer is in the villages where markets are open, where girls attend school without fear, where families sleep soundly through the night. She surveyed the faces of the new recruits before her: former teachers, students, farmers, and shopkeepers, all now preparing to join the ranks of the Lionesses. Strength isn't in the weapons we carry, though we use them when necessary. Our strength is in understanding that true security comes not just from defeating an enemy, but from building communities resistant to their return. In his presidential office, Ibrahim Traore kept a simple photograph on his desk. It showed a Lioness soldier helping a young girl carry books into a reopened school in a formerly contested village. For him, it captured the essence of what they were fighting for: not just the absence of violence, but the presence of hope and possibility. The Lionesses of the Sahel had proven that security could be reimagined, that women could lead that trimagining, and that solutions to Africa's most intractable challenges might already exist within its communities, waiting for the courage to try something new. As insurgent groups continued to adapt their tactics, the Lionesses adapted in turn. Their approach remained dynamic, evolving based on lessons learned from each deployment, but their core philosophy remained constant: that sustainable security required the full participation of women, not just as beneficiaries, but as leaders and implementers in villages across northern Burkina Faso. The arrival of the Lionesses' distinctive vehicles no longer brought surprise. Instead, it brought something that had been absent for too long: confidence that this time the security forces weren't just passing through. They were there to stay, to listen, and to build a peace that could endure. 3 years after the formation of Lionesses, President Traore hosted an international security conference in Ouagadougou that brought together military-led security experts and government officials from across the continent. The centerpiece of the conference was a field demonstration by the now veteran Lioness units, showcasing their unique approach to integrated security. As foreign observers watched, the Lionesses demonstrated not just combat capabilities, but their comprehensive security model. They performed scenarios showing village protection, intelligence gathering through female networks, and crucial civil military operations that had become their hallmark. What you're witnessing isn't just a military unit, Traore told the assembled delegates. It's a complete reimagining of what security means in communities that have experienced generational conflict. These women don't just secure territory, they transform it. The French military contingent, once the most vocal critics of the program, now sent their own female officers to learn from the Lionesses. A French colonel, after observing a demonstration of the Shadow Sister program, admitted to Major Ouedraogo, "We've been fighting in the Sahel for a decade with sophisticated equipment and satellite intelligence, yet your women with basic gear have achieved more sustainable results through human connections." Rigo's response was diplomatic but pointed: technology can win battles, But only human relationships can, when peace. The Lionesses' impact extended beyond security metrics. In a broader social transformation in a region where women had traditionally been excluded from public roles, female village leaders began to emerge in communities where the Lionesses operated. Girls' school attendance reached unprecedented levels as families saw new possibilities for their daughters' futures. Fatoumata Dio, once a quiet seamstress from a small village near the Mali border, had joined the Lionesses after insurgents killed her husband, now a senior sergeant commanding her own squad. She reflected on this transformation during an interview with Pan-African Media. Before joining the Lionesses, I believed my life was over when I lost my husband. Now, I understand it was just beginning. I've helped liberate 12 villages, protected hundreds of families, and trained 36 women in Mishido Sister Network who continue the work when we move to new areas. She paused, her expression softening slightly. Last month, a father from Jibo village brought his daughter to meet me. She was maybe 7 years old. He told her, "This is what you can become." That moment meant more to me than any military decoration. The program was not without continuing challenges. The physical demands of continuous operations took their toll. Psychological burden of serving as both warriors and community builders created unique stresses. The Lionesses experienced casualties, each one mourned deeply, both within the unit and by the communities they protected. Recognizing these challenges, Traore's government established specialized support systems. A dedicated medical unit focused on women's health issues and field conditions. Rotation schedules ensured no team remained in high intensity for too long. Psychological support services were integrated directly into the command structure rather than treated as an afterthought. As the Lionesses' fourth year of operations began, the strategic landscape of the region showed measurable changes. Insurgent groups, once able to move freely across northern Burkina Faso, found their territories increasingly constrained. Intelligence networks established by the Lionesses' Shadow Wister program made it nearly impossible for fighters to blend into local populations. More significantly, recruitment for extremist groups declined sharply in areas where the Lionesses operated. Young men who might once have joined insurgents out of economic desperation or ideological manipulation now had alternatives. Community defense forces, agriculture cooperatives, and other development initiatives established alongside security operations. The Western security paradigm, which had separated military operations from development work, treating them as sequential rather than simultaneous, was fundamentally challenged by the Lionesses' integrated approach. International development agencies began studying the model, recognizing that security and development were not separate phases, but interconnected processes. At a strategic assessment meeting with his Security Council, Traore reviewed the program's evolution. What have we learned that can be applied to other challenges facing our nation? He's his advisors. Defense Minister Sankara, who had first proposed the female units, responded thoughtfully. The key lesson is that our solutions must emerge from our own understanding of our challenges. The Lionesses succeeded not because they adopted foreign doctrine, but because they created approaches specific to our cultural and operational environment. And the role of women, Traore pressed that excluding half our population from security solutions means we fight with one arm tied behind our back. Sankara replied firmly, "The Lionesses have proven that inclusion isn't just a moral principle, it's a strategic advantage." This philosophy began to extend beyond military applications. Traore's government launched initiatives to integrate women into other sectors previously dominated by men: governance, resource management, judicial reform. Each time, the success of the Lionesses provided a powerful example that challenging traditional gender restrictions could yield results that benefited